When Captain Jessica Reeves found herself and 5 wounded soldiers trapped in a remote Afghan outpost with 89 Taliban fighters closing in, she never imagined her Barrett M82A1 sniper rifle would become the only thing standing between them and certain death. But that's exactly what happened on a dusty Thursday afternoon that changed everything. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The heat was oppressive, even by Afghanistan standards. Jessica wiped sweat from her brow as she studied the tactical situation through her binoculars. Their small observation post, tucked into the jagged mountains of Kunar Province, had been designed for surveillance, not sustained combat. Now it had become a death trap. "How's Martinez?" she asked, her voice steady despite the gravity of their situation. Sergeant Wilson looked up from where he was tending the wounded soldier, his hands stained with blood that appeared almost black in the dim light of their shelter. "Not good, Captain." Bullet fragmented when it hit his plate. "He's stable for now, but needs evac within the next few hours." Jessica nodded, processing this information with the clinical detachment she'd developed over 3 combat tours. Martinez was just one of 5 injured men under her command. The others were in various states of distress. Thompson with a shattered femur, Ramirez nursing second-degree burns from an RPG that had nearly taken his head off, Davis fighting off shock after losing too much blood from a gunshot wound to his shoulder, and Lewis with a concussion that had left him drifting in and out of consciousness. They had been conducting routine reconnaissance when their position was compromised. The Taliban had come at them with surprising coordination and firepower, forcing a tactical withdrawal to this secondary position, a half-collapsed stone structure that had once been someone's home, now a desperate last stand against overwhelming odds. "Comms?" Jessica asked, though she already knew the answer. "Still down, Captain," Wilson replied, his expression grim. The radio took a direct hit during the first attack. No way to call for extraction or air support. Jessica's mind raced through their dwindling options. Their primary extraction point was compromised, their communication equipment destroyed, and they were facing an enemy force that outnumbered them nearly 15 to 1. Standard operating procedure would dictate they hold position and wait for rescue, but Jessica knew that wasn't an option. Their absence wouldn't be noted for at least 10 more hours, and by then it would be too late. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Jessica moved to the narrow window, carefully positioning herself to remain hidden, while observing the enemy movements below. The Taliban fighters were setting up for a coordinated assault, moving with the practiced precision of experienced combatants. These weren't the disorganized militants she'd encountered in previous engagements. These were battle-hardened fighters implementing actual military tactics. "They've got us surrounded on 3 sides," she reported, using the terrain for cover, setting up firing positions. "They're taking their time, probably thinking we're finished anyway." Wilson joined her at the window, his weathered face betraying the concern he was trying to hide. "What's the play, Captain? We can't move the wounded across open ground, and we don't have enough ammo to hold them off indefinitely." Jessica's eyes fell on the long case propped against the wall. Inside was her Barrett M82A1, 50 caliber sniper rifle, a weapon she'd become intimately familiar with during specialized training at Fort Benning. The Barrett wasn't standard issue for reconnaissance missions, but Jessica had insisted on bringing it along after intelligence suggested increased enemy activity in the region. That decision might now be the only thing keeping them alive. "How's our ammo situation?" she asked, already moving toward the case. Wilson's expression shifted as he caught her meaning. 5 magazines for the Barrett. Maybe 200 rounds for the M4s. A few grenades. Not enough for a prolonged engagement. Jessica unlatched the case and removed the Barrett with practiced care. The rifle was massive, 57 inches long and weighing over 30 pounds, but in her hands it felt like an extension of herself. She'd spent countless hours mastering this weapon, understanding its capabilities and limitations in ways few other soldiers could claim. "I'm going to create a diversion," she said, checking the rifle's action with methodical precision. "Something that will make them reconsider their approach, buy us some time until help arrives, or we can move the wounded to a better position." Wilson's eyes widened. "With all due respect, Captain, that's suicide." "There are too many of them." Jessica loaded a magazine into the Barrett, her movements smooth and deliberate. The Barrett has an effective range of nearly 2,000 meters. I can engage from positions they won't expect, hit targets they think are safe. I'm not planning to take on 89 fighters single-handedly, Sergeant. I just need to create enough confusion and fear to disrupt their attack. As she spoke, Jessica was already formulating a strategy. The mountainous terrain offered multiple vantage points that would allow her to engage enemy positions without exposing herself to concentrated return fire. With proper movement between firing positions, she could create the illusion of multiple snipers, potentially convincing the Taliban they were facing a larger force. "What about us?" Wilson asked, gesturing to the wounded men. "You'll hold this position. Conserve ammo, keep the men stable, and be ready to move when I give the signal." Jessica checked her sidearm and selected additional magazines for the Barrett, securing them in her tactical vest. "If I can disrupt their command structure and create enough chaos, we might be able to find a path to the secondary extraction point in the valley." Wilson wanted to protest. She could see it in his eyes. But they both knew there were no better options. The wounded couldn't defend themselves effectively, and splitting their already minimal fighting force was a risk they had to take. Jessica had always been different from other officers. Her background in competitive shooting had given her an edge during sniper training, and her 3 previous combat tours had honed those skills in the crucible of actual warfare. What set her apart, though, wasn't just technical proficiency, but a tactical mind that could assess complex situations and identify unconventional solutions. The path to her current position hadn't been easy. As one of the few women in special operations support roles, Jessica had faced skepticism and outright hostility throughout her career. Every qualification, every achievement, had been scrutinized more harshly than those of her male counterparts. She'd learned to let her performance speak for itself, accumulating a service record that even her harshest critics couldn't dismiss. Now, as she prepared to put her life on the line, those experiences seemed distant and irrelevant. All that mattered was the mission before her, keeping her wounded soldiers alive against seemingly impossible odds. "I'll maintain radio contact," Jessica said, securing the last of her equipment. "If you don't hear from me for more than 30 minutes, assume the worst and make your own decisions about extraction." Wilson nodded, his expression a mixture of concern and respect. "Good hunting, Captain." Jessica slipped out through a narrow opening in the back of the structure, staying low and using the terrain for cover. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the mountainside, providing additional concealment as she moved away from their defensive position. The weight of the Barrett across her back was substantial, but she'd trained for this, conditioning her body to carry heavy loads across difficult terrain. The first firing position she selected was a natural depression behind a large boulder, roughly 800 meters from the main Taliban force. From here, she had clear sight lines to several key enemy positions while remaining hidden from direct observation. Jessica set up the Barrett with practiced efficiency, deploying the bipod and adjusting her position to minimize her silhouette. Through the scope, she could see Taliban fighters moving with purpose, establishing a perimeter around the building where Wilson and the wounded men were holding out. Their confidence was evident in their movements. They clearly believed they were dealing with a small, isolated unit that would be easily overwhelmed once their assault began in earnest. Jessica controlled her breathing, slowing her heart rate as she'd been taught. The crosshairs settled on a figure that stood apart from the others, a man gesturing authoritatively, directing fighters into position. A commander or senior leader, she assessed, exactly the kind of high-value target that could disrupt their command structure. The distance was well within the Barrett's effective range. Jessica made minor adjustments for wind and elevation, then slowly squeezed the trigger. The rifle's recoil was substantial, but she absorbed it with practiced technique, already adjusting her aim for a follow-up shot before the first round had even reached its target. The .50 caliber round struck with devastating effect. Through her scope, Jessica watched the Taliban commander crumple instantly. Before the fighters around him could react, she had already fired a second shot, taking down another apparent leader figure. The massive report of the Barrett echoed through the mountains, a distinctive sound that immediately identified it as something far more powerful than standard military rifles. Jessica immediately relocated, moving quickly to a position 300 meters east of her initial firing point. The Taliban response was predictable. Concentrated fire directed at her previous location while fighters scrambled for cover. By the time they realized the shots were coming from a different position, Jessica had already claimed 2 more targets, both machine gun operators who had been setting up heavy weapons. Her radio crackled. "Captain, this is Wilson. What's happening out there?" "Creating chaos." Jessica replied tersely, already moving to her 3rd firing position. "How are our guys?" "Holding steady. The enemy seems confused about where to focus their attention." "Good. Stand by for further instructions." The pattern continued for the next hour. Jessica firing from one position, eliminating key targets, then relocating before enemy fire could find her. Each shot was deliberate, calculated for maximum psychological impact. She targeted radio operators, heavy weapons teams, and apparent leadership figures, gradually dismantling the Taliban's command structure and sowing confusion throughout their ranks. From her 4th position, Jessica observed the effects of her campaign. The Taliban fighters were no longer moving with confidence and purpose. Their formations had become disorganized, with some groups appearing hesitant to advance while others fired wildly at shadows. The perception that they were facing a coordinated sniper team rather than a single operator was taking hold, exactly as she'd hoped. But the situation remained desperate. Jessica counted her remaining ammunition, 3 magazines for the Barrett, barely enough to continue the deception for another hour. The sun was beginning to set, which would provide additional cover for movement, but would also make accurate shooting more challenging. She needed to create an opportunity for extraction before darkness fell completely. Jessica selected her next target carefully, a fuel tank attached to one of the Taliban vehicles positioned approximately 200 meters from her current location. The shot would be difficult, requiring perfect compensation for distance and wind, but if successful, the resulting explosion would create the kind of spectacular distraction they needed. She settled into position, controlling her breathing and focusing completely on the shot. The crosshairs aligned with the vulnerable point of the fuel tank, and Jessica squeezed the trigger with deliberate pressure. The Barrett roared, sending the buck. 50 caliber round downrange with devastating velocity. The explosion exceeded her expectations. The fuel tank detonated with spectacular force, igniting ammunition stored in the vehicle and creating a secondary explosion that engulfed several nearby fighters. Chaos erupted as Taliban forces scattered, many believing they were under attack from aircraft or heavy weapons rather than a single sniper. Jessica used the confusion to relocate again, this time moving closer to the building where Wilson and the wounded were holding out. From this new position, she could provide more direct covering fire when the time came for extraction. "Wilson, this is Reeves," she radioed. "Prepare to move." "I've created a gap in their eastern perimeter. There's a drainage culvert that leads toward the valley. It should provide cover for about 300 meters." "Roger that, Captain. We're getting the wounded ready now." Jessica continued firing strategically, targeting any Taliban fighters who attempted to reorganize or move toward the eastern perimeter. The Barrett's massive rounds tore through cover that would have stopped conventional rifle fire, leaving nowhere for the enemy to hide safely. The psychological impact was evident. Fighters who had been advancing confidently hours earlier were now hesitating to expose themselves at all. As the sun dipped below the mountains, Jessica fired her last diversionary shot. Another vehicle, another explosion, another wave of chaos among the Taliban ranks. Then she was moving, sprinting through the growing darkness to rendezvous with Wilson and the wounded soldiers. She found them ready to move, the injured men supported between their more mobile comrades. Martinez, the most severely wounded, was strapped to a makeshift stretcher improvised from rifle straps and clothing. "We've got a narrow window," Jessica explained, checking her watch. "The eastern perimeter is thinnest, and they're still disorganized from the explosions. We move fast, stay low, and head for the drainage culvert. Once we're through that, we've got about 2 kilometers to the secondary extraction point." Wilson nodded, his expression grim but determined. "Lead the way, Captain." Jessica took point, the Barrett now slung across her back to free her hands for her more maneuverable M4 carbine. They moved as quietly as possible, helping the wounded navigate the rough terrain while maintaining constant awareness of enemy positions. The sounds of confused Taliban communications echoed around them, fighters still trying to determine where the devastating sniper fire had originated. The drainage culvert was exactly where Jessica had remembered it from earlier reconnaissance, a concrete tunnel running beneath a road the Taliban had been using for resupply. The entrance was partially concealed by vegetation, making it difficult to spot in the growing darkness. "In here," Jessica whispered, helping guide Martinez's stretcher into the narrow passage. "Watch your heads and stay quiet." The culvert was tight, barely large enough for a person to crawl through, and filled with several inches of stagnant water. For the wounded men, already in pain and exhausted, it was an excruciating journey, but the alternative was certain death. And that knowledge drove them forward despite their suffering. They had covered perhaps half the length of the culvert when Jessica heard vehicles above them. Taliban fighters repositioning, still searching for the phantom sniper team that had decimated their forces. She signaled for everyone to freeze, holding her breath as dust filtered down from the road above. For nearly 10 minutes they remained motionless, listening to the enemy movements overhead. Jessica's mind raced through contingency plans. If they were discovered, how she would deploy the last of their grenades, how she would use the Barrett at close range if necessary, how she would ensure that none of her wounded men fell into enemy hands alive. Finally, the vehicles moved on, and they continued their agonizing journey through the culvert. When they emerged on the other side, the night had fully settled over the mountains, providing crucial concealment for the next phase of their extraction. 2 kilometers to the secondary extraction point, Jessica reminded them, consulting her GPS. "We need to maintain absolute noise discipline. They'll be searching the whole area now." The journey was slow and painful. Every few hundred meters they would stop, allowing the wounded men to rest while Jessica scouted ahead for enemy patrols. The sound of Taliban vehicles and occasional gunfire echoed through the valley, but their disorganized search patterns suggested Jessica's sniper campaign had succeeded in creating lasting confusion. As they approached the extraction point, a relatively flat area suitable for helicopter landing, Jessica made contact with their base using a backup communication device that had survived the initial attack. "Thunderbird Base, this is Reaper 6, she transmitted, using their unit's call sign. "Emergency extraction required at secondary LZ, 5 wounded, 1 ambulatory. Area is hot. Repeat, area is hot." The response came almost immediately, filling her with relief. "Reaper 6, this is Thunderbird. Copy your emergency extraction. QRF is spinning up now. ETA 25 minutes to your position. Can you mark the LZ?" "Affirmative, Thunderbird. We'll mark with infrared when we hear approach." Jessica turned to her team, hope visible on her face for the first time since their ordeal began. "Extraction in 25 minutes. We need to secure the LZ and prepare for potential enemy contact during pickup." They established a defensive perimeter, positioning the wounded in the center, where they would be first to board the incoming helicopters. Jessica distributed the remaining ammunition, ensuring everyone had the means to defend themselves if Taliban forces discovered their position before extraction arrived. The minutes crawled by with excruciating slowness. Jessica maintained vigilant watch, the Barrett once again deployed and ready if enemy forces approached. In the distance, they could hear vehicles moving, the Taliban expanding their search pattern, growing increasingly desperate to find the American forces that had humiliated them. When the distinctive thump of helicopter rotors finally reached their ears, Jessica activated the infrared beacon that would guide the pilots to their position. Within minutes, 2 Black Hawk helicopters appeared over the ridge, their dark silhouettes barely visible against the night sky. "Here they come," Jessica announced, her voice steady despite her exhaustion. "Wilson, get the wounded ready for immediate loading. I'll maintain overwatch until everyone's aboard." As the helicopters approached, Jessica scanned the surrounding terrain through her night vision, alert for any sign of enemy movement. The Taliban would certainly hear the helicopters and might make one final desperate attempt to prevent the extraction. She wasn't disappointed. Through her scope, Jessica spotted a group of fighters moving rapidly toward their position, having finally located the American forces they'd been hunting. Without hesitation, she engaged with the Barrett, the massive rifle thundering in the night. The first 2 rounds found their marks, dropping the lead fighters and causing the others to scatter for cover. "Contact east!" Jessica shouted over the growing roar of the helicopters. "Wilson, get them loaded now!" The Black Hawks touched down in a swirl of dust and debris, crew chiefs immediately jumping out to assist with loading the wounded. Jessica maintained steady fire, forcing the approaching Taliban fighters to keep their heads down as her team scrambled toward the waiting helicopters. "Captain, we're loaded! Let's go!" Wilson shouted from the door of the lead helicopter. Jessica fired 3 final shots with the Barrett, then abandoned the massive rifle. It had served its purpose, and she couldn't risk it falling into enemy hands. Sprinting toward the helicopter, she provided covering fire with her M4 as Taliban fighters began to emerge from their cover. The crew chief pulled her aboard as the helicopter lifted off, rounds from enemy weapons pinging off its armored underside. Within seconds, they were climbing away from the landing zone, the second Black Hawk tight on their wing. Inside the helicopter, Jessica collapsed against the bulkhead, the full weight of their ordeal finally catching up to her. Wilson handed her a canteen, a look of profound respect on his face. 89 hostile fighters, he said, barely audible over the roar of the rotors. And you took them on with a single rifle. Jessica shook her head, too exhausted for false modesty. Not took them on. Just confused them long enough for us to get out alive. But they both knew it was more than that. Her extraordinary skill with the Barrett, combined with tactical ingenuity and sheer courage, had transformed a hopeless situation into an improbable rescue. 5 men were returning home who would otherwise have died on that mountain. As the helicopters thundered through the night toward the safety of their forward operating base, Jessica thought about the Barrett she'd left behind. That rifle had been more than just a weapon. It had been the embodiment of everything she'd trained for, everything she believed about creating possibilities where none seemed to exist. The story of how Captain Jessica Reeves held off 89 Taliban fighters with a single Barrett. 50 caliber rifle would eventually become legendary within special operations circles. But for Jessica herself, the only victory that mattered was the one measured in the lives of the men sleeping fitfully around her in the helicopter. Men who would see their families again because she had refused to accept defeat. In the ultimate crucible of combat, she had proven what she had always known, that sometimes, one person with the right skills, the right weapon, and the unbreakable will to survive can change everything. The steel door of the briefing room slammed shut behind Jessica as she stepped into the fluorescent-lit hallway of Forward Operating Base Condor. 3 days had passed since the extraction, but the memory of those desperate hours on the mountainside remained etched in her mind with crystal clarity. The sound of the Barrett, the smell of cordite, the expressions on the Taliban fighters' faces when they realized they were being hunted by something they couldn't see, it all replayed in an endless loop whenever she closed her eyes. Colonel Hammond was waiting for her, his weathered face unreadable as he fell into step beside her. "Walk with me, Captain." Jessica matched his stride, sensing the gravity in his tone. Hammond wasn't known for small talk or unnecessary pleasantries. Whatever he needed to discuss was important enough to seek her out personally, rather than summon her to his office. "How are the men?" she asked, deflecting whatever was coming. "Stable. All 5 have been airlifted to Landstuhl. Martinez will need extensive surgery, but the doctors are optimistic." Hammond's voice softened slightly. "They're alive because of you, Reeves. What you did out there, holding off nearly 100 hostiles with a single rifle, it's already becoming the stuff of legend around here." Jessica shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. Quote, "I just created confusion and bought us time. Anyone with the same training would have done the same." Hammond stopped walking, turning to face her directly. "No, they wouldn't have. That's exactly why I need to talk to you." He glanced around the hallway, then gestured toward a side door that led to the base's small garden courtyard, one of the few places on the FOB where private conversations could happen without walls literally having ears. Once outside, Hammond's demeanor shifted subtly. The official command presence receded, replaced by something more personal, more urgent. "What I'm about to tell you isn't common knowledge, Captain. In fact, it's classified at levels well above your current clearance." Jessica felt a chill that had nothing to do with the evening air. "Sir? Your encounter wasn't random. Intelligence suggests the Taliban knew exactly where your team would be and when. They were waiting for you specifically." The implications hit Jessica like physical blows. A setup. An ambush planned with insider knowledge. Someone had deliberately placed her team in the crosshairs. "How?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Who?" Hammond's expression darkened. "That's what we need to find out. There's been a pattern of compromised operations in this region over the past 4 months. Special operations teams ambushed with suspicious precision. Supply convoys hit at vulnerable points along routes that should have been secure. Your reconnaissance mission was the sixth incident that suggests a serious intelligence breach. Jessica processed this information with the same tactical clarity she'd applied on the mountainside. You think we have a mole, someone feeding operational details to the Taliban. Not just any mole, Hammond replied. Someone with access to high-level operational planning. Someone who can see the complete picture and extract the critical details that make our forces vulnerable. The colonel reached into his pocket and removed a small flash drive, offering it to Jessica with a significant look. This contains everything we know so far. I've been authorized to form a small team to investigate internally, off the books. I want you to lead it. Jessica stared at the drive, understanding instantly why Hammond had chosen her. As the survivor of what should have been a fatal ambush, she had personal stakes in the investigation. More importantly, she'd demonstrated the ability to function effectively when outmanned and outgunned. Exactly the situation they'd face investigating a potential high-level security breach within their own command structure. Why me, sir? I'm not intelligence. I'm just a captain with a rifle. Hammond's smile was humorless. You're a captain who just outsmarted and outfought 89 enemy combatants with limited resources and no backup. More importantly, you're not connected to any of the power structures within regional command. You're an outsider, which means you're less likely to have personal loyalties that might compromise the investigation. Jessica took the drive, weighing it in her palm as if it contained physical evidence of the betrayal Hammond was describing. Who else is on this team? Your choice. 2 people maximum. Someone you trust implicitly. This stays completely compartmentalized until we identify the source of the leak. Jessica immediately thought of Wilson. The sergeant had proven his reliability and discretion during their ordeal on the mountain, but there was someone else she needed, someone with specialized skills that would be essential for this kind of investigation. I want Wilson and Lieutenant Park, she decided. Park's background in signals intelligence and cryptanalysis will be crucial if we're dealing with compromised communications. Hammond nodded in approval. Good choices. Both have been vetted and cleared. You'll operate from a secure facility off the main base grid. Everything about this investigation remains strictly need to know. As far as anyone else is concerned, you and your team are conducting after-action analysis of the ambush. As Hammond laid out the parameters of the investigation, Jessica's mind was already racing ahead, identifying potential leads and security vulnerabilities. The skills that had kept her alive on the mountain, patience, attention to detail, the ability to identify patterns in seemingly chaotic situations, would be her primary weapons in this new battlefield. When do we start? She asked. Now, Hammond replied, checking his watch. Park and Wilson are already waiting at the secure facility. Your gear has been transferred there as well, including a replacement for the Barrett you left behind. Jessica felt a surge of emotion at the mention of the rifle. That weapon had become almost an extension of herself during those desperate hours, and abandoning it had felt like leaving a part of herself on the mountainside. Thank you, sir. We won't let you down. Hammond's expression grew grave. Be careful, Captain. Whoever is feeding information to the enemy has managed to stay hidden for months. They're smart, well-positioned, and absolutely ruthless. They've already caused the deaths of 17 American personnel. If they realize you're hunting them, they'll come after you with everything they have. Jessica met his gaze unflinchingly. Let them try, sir. I've already faced their worst and walked away. This time, I'll be ready for them. The secure facility turned out to be a converted storage building a quarter-mile from the main base perimeter. From the outside, it looked abandoned. Peeling paint, dusty windows, nothing to suggest it housed cutting-edge surveillance equipment, and a team investigating high-level treason. Wilson and Park were waiting inside, both looking somewhat bewildered by their sudden reassignment. Lieutenant Minji Park was a Korean-American intelligence officer Jessica had worked with on previous operations. Her expertise in electronic warfare and signal decryption had saved lives on multiple occasions, though her reserved demeanor meant her contributions often went unrecognized by the more boisterous members of the command staff. Captain, Wilson greeted her with evident relief. They pulled me out of debrief without explanation. Said you'd requested me for a special assignment. Jessica secured the door behind her before addressing them. What I'm about to tell you doesn't leave this room. Our mission on the mountain wasn't just compromised by bad luck or good enemy intelligence. It was deliberately sabotaged by someone within our own command structure. She connected the flash drive to the secure terminal and displayed its contents on the wall-mounted screen. 6 separate operations, all compromised in ways that suggested detailed inside knowledge. Casualty reports, forensic analyses of attack patterns, communication logs showing suspicious timing between certain transmissions and subsequent enemy activity. Colonel Hammond has authorized us to conduct an independent investigation, Jessica continued. We report directly to him, bypassing the normal chain of command. Our mission is to identify whoever is feeding operational details to the enemy and gather enough evidence to ensure their prosecution. Park studied the data with the focused intensity that had made her such a valuable intelligence asset. This is a sophisticated operation, she observed quietly. The pattern suggests someone with access to PSI-PRNet and attendance at high-level planning meetings. That narrows the field considerably. Wilson looked troubled as the implications sank in. We're talking about a senior officer or someone on a command staff. This isn't some disgruntled private selling secrets for cash. This is high-level treason. Jessica nodded grimly. Exactly. Which is why we need to move carefully. Our primary advantage is that the traitor doesn't know we're looking for them. They think their operation is still secure. She outlined her initial approach. Park would analyze communication patterns and electronic signatures, looking for correlations between specific transmissions and compromised operations. Wilson would review personnel records and movement logs, identifying who had access to the relevant information before each compromised mission. Jessica would focus on the operational patterns themselves, looking for commonalities that might reveal what specific information had been leaked and how. We work in parallel, sharing information only within this room, Jessica instructed. No digital communications about the investigation, no discussions outside this facility, no unusual behavior that might tip off our target. They worked through the night, establishing their baseline analysis and identifying initial patterns. By dawn, they had narrowed their focus to 14 individuals who had potential access to all 6 compromised operations. It was still too broad a field, but it was progress. As the investigation entered its second day, Jessica found herself applying the same methodical patience she'd used as a sniper. This wasn't about rapid movement or aggressive action. It was about watching, waiting, identifying the perfect moment to act. Every piece of data was a potential target. Every communication log a potential line of sight to their quarry. Park made the first significant breakthrough on the 3rd day, identifying an unusual pattern in the timing of certain encrypted transmissions. These signals occur consistently between 12 and 18 hours before each compromised operation, she explained, highlighting the relevant data points. They're using standard military encryption, but there's something odd about the packet size and routing. Wilson's analysis of personnel movements provided additional correlation. 3 of our 14 suspects were present at the command center during each of these transmission windows. He reported Colonel Winters, Major Galloway, and Captain Chen. Jessica studied the personnel files of these 3 officers, looking for anything that might suggest motive or opportunity. Winters was a decorated career officer with over 20 years of service. Galloway was younger but equally distinguished, with multiple combat tours and a reputation for tactical brilliance. Chen was the newest addition to the command staff, having transferred from Pacific Command just 6 months earlier. We need more, Jessica decided. Park, can you isolate the exact terminal these transmissions originated from? The lieutenant nodded, though her expression suggested it wouldn't be easy. With time, yes. The system logs should contain that information, but accessing them without alerting network security will be challenging. Jessica considered their options. Moving too aggressively might alert their target, but moving too cautiously could allow another operation to be compromised, costing more lives. Do it, she instructed. Wilson and I will continue narrowing the field based on opportunity and access patterns. If we can identify the exact terminal, we can set up surveillance and catch them in the act. The next 72 hours became a blur of intensive analysis and growing tension. Park worked miracles with the communication logs, eventually tracing the suspicious transmissions to a specific terminal in the command center's intelligence fusion cell, a workspace used primarily by senior officers during operational planning. We can't narrow it further through the logs, Park reported, frustration evident in her voice. The terminal is accessed by multiple authorized users throughout each day. We'd need physical surveillance to identify our target. Jessica studied the floor plans of the command center, identifying potential observation points and security vulnerabilities. We need a way to monitor that terminal without being detected. Conventional surveillance equipment would be discovered during routine security sweeps. Wilson, who had been unusually quiet for the past hour, suddenly looked up from the personnel file he'd been reviewing. "I think I found something." Major Galloway made 4 trips to Kabul in the past 3 months, all coinciding with the days immediately following compromised operations. Jessica felt her pulse quicken. "Bank records?" "Nothing unusual in his official accounts," Wilson replied. "But there's an anomaly in his leave patterns. He requested routine administrative leave for each of these trips, but flight manifests show he didn't return to his listed destination. He diverted to Kabul each time." It wasn't definitive evidence, but it was the first real lead pointing to a specific individual. Jessica made her decision. "We focus on Galloway. Park, I need you to develop something that can monitor activity on that specific terminal without being detected by standard security measures." Wilson, dig deeper into Galloway's background, financials, connections, anything that might explain his motivation. Jessica herself would handle the most dangerous aspect of their investigation, physical surveillance of Galloway himself. If he was indeed their traitor, he would be hyper-vigilant against being followed, employing counter-surveillance techniques and maintaining constant situational awareness. The next operational planning session was scheduled for 0800 the following morning, a briefing for a high-value target extraction in the eastern provinces. If their analysis was correct, Galloway would attempt to transmit compromising details sometime after that meeting. Jessica positioned herself in the officers' mess, a location that offered a clear view of the corridor leading to the command center while providing a plausible reason for her presence. She nursed a cup of coffee, appearing to review mission reports while maintaining peripheral awareness of everyone entering or leaving the target area. Galloway arrived for the planning session at precisely 0745, his demeanor professionally detached as he exchanged greetings with other officers. Nothing in his behavior suggested nervousness or unusual concern. Either he was innocent, or he was exceptionally skilled at concealing his treachery. The planning session lasted 3 hours. When it concluded, Jessica observed Galloway returning to his quarters rather than remaining at the command center. This deviation from their expected pattern was concerning. Had he somehow detected their surveillance? Or was he simply changing his methodology to avoid establishing a recognizable pattern? Jessica maintained her position, waiting to see if Galloway would return to the command center later in the day. Her patience was rewarded when, shortly after 1,600 hours, he reappeared, moving with purposeful strides toward the intelligence fusion cell. She keyed her secure radio, signaling Park and Wilson that their target was moving into position. Park had managed to install a sophisticated monitoring program on the terminal in question, one that would record all keystrokes and transmissions without triggering security protocols. Now they would see if their theory was correct. Galloway remained in the fusion cell for 47 minutes, an unremarkable duration for an officer reviewing operational details. When he emerged, his expression and body language revealed nothing unusual. He proceeded to the officers' mess for dinner, engaged in normal conversation with his colleagues, and eventually returned to his quarters at 2,100 hours. Jessica returned to their secure facility, where Park was already analyzing the data captured during Galloway's session at the terminal. Her expression was grim as Jessica entered. "We were right," Park confirmed, displaying the captured keystrokes on the main screen. He accessed the operational plans for tomorrow's extraction, copied specific details about timing and approach vectors, then encoded them in what appeared to be a routine logistics request to headquarters. Wilson had been monitoring the base's outgoing communications. The transmission was sent, bounced through 3 different relay stations, and eventually terminated at a server in Kabul. From there, we lose the trail. Jessica studied the evidence, feeling a complex mixture of satisfaction at confirming their suspicions and disgust at the betrayal they had uncovered. Major David Galloway, decorated combat veteran with 12 years of distinguished service, was selling American lives to the enemy. "We need to take this to Hammond," she decided. "But first, we need to understand why. This isn't just about money or ideology. Something drove Galloway to betray everything he supposedly stood for." Wilson had already compiled a comprehensive background analysis. There's nothing obvious in his history. No financial problems, no suspicious contacts, no radical political affiliations. By all accounts, he was the model officer. Park, who had been cross-referencing Galloway's file with additional databases, suddenly straightened. Wait, there's something here. She pulled up a heavily redacted after-action report from 3 years earlier, an operation in the same region where Galloway had served as a junior officer. This mission was classified above my access level, she explained, but the summary indicates a high-casualty operation with questionable intelligence. The mission commander was... She paused, her expression shifting to one of surprise. Colonel Robert Hammond. The revelation landed like a physical blow. Hammond had personally selected them for this investigation. He had provided the initial intelligence suggesting a mole within the command structure. And now they discovered he had a direct connection to Galloway through a classified operation with, quote, questionable intelligence. We need to know what happened on that mission, Jessica stated, her mind racing through possibilities. If Hammond and Galloway have a shared history involving a controversial operation, it could be relevant to understanding Galloway's motivation. Park attempted to access the full report but encountered security barriers beyond her ability to circumvent. We'd need Hammond's authorization to see the complete file. Jessica considered their options. Approaching Hammond directly would be risky if there was any connection between him and Galloway's activities. Yet continuing their investigation without this potentially crucial information could lead them in the wrong direction. We stick to the plan, she decided after careful consideration. We have concrete evidence of Galloway's actions. We take that to Hammond as instructed. His reaction will tell us whether he's involved or not. They compiled their evidence into a comprehensive briefing package, documenting Galloway's access to the compromised operations, his suspicious travel patterns, and the damning evidence of his most recent transmission. Jessica secured this package in a sealed envelope, then prepared to deliver their findings personally to Hammond. The meeting was scheduled for 0700 the following morning. Jessica arrived at Hammond's office precisely on time, the sealed envelope containing their evidence tucked securely in her uniform pocket. She had deliberately chosen not to bring Park or Wilson, calculating that if Hammond was somehow involved, it would be safer for them to remain separate from this initial confrontation. Hammond greeted her with his usual brusque efficiency, offering coffee before getting directly to the point. You have something for me, Captain? Jessica placed the sealed envelope on his desk. We've identified the source of the intelligence leak, sir. Major David Galloway has been accessing operational details and transmitting them through encrypted channels to a server in Kabul. Hammond's expression remained perfectly neutral as he opened the envelope and reviewed its contents. His eyes moved methodically across each page, revealing nothing of his thoughts or reactions. When he finally looked up, his face was grave but unreadable. This is thorough work, Captain. Damning evidence. He set the documents aside and leaned back in his chair. There's just one problem. You've been operating under false premises. Jessica felt her muscles tense, her body instinctively preparing for threat. Sir? Major Galloway isn't a traitor, Captain. He's a counterintelligence operative running a sanctioned deception operation. Hammond's voice was calm, almost apologetic. The information he's been transmitting contains carefully crafted inaccuracies designed to mislead enemy forces and identify their intelligence-gathering methods. The explanation hit Jessica like ice water. If Hammond was telling the truth, their entire investigation had been tracking a legitimate operation rather than a security breach, but that didn't explain the ambush that had nearly killed her team. With respect, sir, my men nearly died because of operational details leaked to enemy forces. That wasn't disinformation. It was our exact position and movement timeline. Hammond nodded, acknowledging the point. You're right, Captain. There is a leak, but it isn't Galloway. He reached into his desk drawer and removed a classified folder stamped with the highest security clearances. It's someone else entirely. Someone we've been trying to identify for months. As Hammond explained the full situation, Jessica realized they had been caught in a web far more complex than they had imagined. Galloway's transmissions were indeed part of a counterintelligence operation, one designed to feed false information to the enemy, while the real investigation proceeded at a deeper level. Your ambush was never part of Galloway's operation, Hammond confirmed. That information came from a different source, one we still haven't identified. That's why I selected your team for this investigation. You were outside the normal command structure, unknown variables that our actual mole wouldn't be watching. Jessica processed this revelation, her tactical mind reassessing everything they had learned over the past week. So our investigation was a cover for your real investigation. You used us as a distraction. Hammond didn't deny it. A necessary one. The real mole has evaded our best counterintelligence teams for months. They're cautious, methodical, and deeply embedded. We needed fresh eyes and unconventional thinking. Exactly what you demonstrated on that mountainside with your Barrett. The conversation was interrupted by an urgent knock at the door. Hammond's aide entered without waiting for permission, his expression tense. "Sir, we've just received word. The extraction team was ambushed at the LZ. Heavy casualties reported. The Emergency Operations Center was chaos incarnate. Officers shouted over each other while communications specialists struggled to establish contact with surviving members of the extraction team. The tactical display showed the ambush site, a narrow valley that had seemed secure according to all intelligence assessments but had proven to be a perfect killing zone." Jessica stood beside Hammond, watching the disaster unfold in real time. 12 operators had been deployed for the extraction mission. Current reports indicated at least 7 casualties, with the survivors pinned down by heavy enemy fire from multiple elevated positions. "This is happening right now," Hammond stated grimly. "Exactly the same pattern as your ambush. Somehow they knew the exact insertion point and time." Jessica's tactical mind was already racing, analyzing the situation with the same clarity she'd applied on the mountainside. "The leak happened after our meeting this morning. The mole was in that briefing room and transmitted the details immediately afterward." Hammond nodded. "Which means they're one of 7 people who had full operational knowledge. Winters, Chen, Rodriguez, Pearson, Thompson, McKenzie, and myself. The implications were staggering. Their traitor was among the highest-ranking officers on the base. Someone with access to every operational detail and the authority to influence mission planning. More importantly, they had to be extraordinarily skilled at covering their tracks, having evaded multiple investigations already. We need to stop this now," Jessica insisted. "Those men need immediate support." Hammond was already moving toward the communications station. "Spectre 03 is on station approximately 12 minutes out. We're redirecting for emergency close air support." Jessica studied the tactical display, her years of special operations experience allowing her to read the terrain like a familiar book. The surviving team members were in a desperate position, but there was a potential extraction point approximately 800 meters northeast of their current location if they could reach it. "They need someone who knows the ground," she said, decision crystallizing in her mind. "Someone who can guide them to a defensible position where Spectre can provide effective support." Hammond looked at her sharply. "What are you suggesting, Captain?" "I need a helicopter and my Barrett. I can insert here," she indicated a ridge approximately 2 kilometers from the ambush site, "work my way to their position and guide them to the extraction point. With proper sniper support, they can make it." "That's suicide, Captain. The entire area is hot, and we still don't know the full extent of enemy forces." Jessica met his gaze unflinchingly. "With respect, sir, those men will die waiting for a conventional rescue operation. I've already proven I can operate effectively against overwhelming odds. Give me Wilson as spotter, and we can create enough disruption to get those survivors out." Hammond studied her for a long moment, weighing the risks against the rapidly diminishing chances for the trapped operators. Finally, he nodded. "Authorized. Take whatever you need. Helo will be ready in 15 minutes. Jessica was already moving, her mind shifting into the focused clarity of mission planning. "I need to brief Wilson and get our equipment. And, sir, when we return, I want access to the command center's secure communications logs for the period immediately following this morning's briefing. Whoever transmitted those operational details left electronic fingerprints." Hammond's expression hardened. "Finding our traitor is secondary to saving those operators, Captain. They're connected, sir. The best way to prevent more ambushes is to cut off the intelligence leak at its source." As Jessica strode from the operations center, her determination solidified into resolve. This wasn't just about rescuing the trapped operators, though that was mission priority. This was about ending a betrayal that had already cost too many American lives. Wilson was waiting at their secure facility, having already been alerted to the ambush. His expression shifted from concern to grim determination when Jessica outlined their mission. "Time to finish what we started on that mountain," he said, already gathering their equipment. Park looked up from her workstation, where she'd been analyzing communication patterns from the command center. "I can help from here. If the mole transmitted after this morning's briefing, I might be able to isolate the signal pattern." Jessica nodded her approval. "Focus on the 7 individuals Hammond identified. Look for any unusual communications, especially anything encrypted or routed through non-standard channels." Their equipment preparation was swift and methodical. Jessica had received a replacement Barrett M82A1, identical to the one she'd abandoned on the mountainside. The familiar weight of the rifle brought a sense of grim satisfaction as she checked its action and sighting system. Wilson packed additional ammunition, communications equipment, and medical supplies. Both knew they were embarking on a high-risk operation with minimal support, but neither hesitated. The lives of their fellow operators hung in the balance, and time was their most precious resource. The helicopter was waiting as promised, a modified Black Hawk with reduced acoustic signature and additional armor plating. The pilot, a veteran with extensive special operations experience, listened intently as Jessica explained their insertion plan. "We'll need to come in low and fast," she instructed. "Drop us here, then immediately clear the area. The enemy will be listening for aircraft, and we need them focused on the main ambush site, not our insertion point." The flight to the target area took 27 minutes. 27 minutes during which Jessica and Wilson studied satellite imagery of the terrain, memorizing key features and identifying potential sniper positions. The communications from the trapped operators had become increasingly desperate, reporting at least 2 more casualties and dwindling ammunition. Coming up on the insertion point, the pilot announced, "Be advised, we're picking up scattered radio traffic indicating significant enemy movement throughout the area." Jessica acknowledged the warning, making final adjustments to her tactical plan. The helicopter would drop them on a ridge approximately 2 kilometers from the ambush site. From there, they would proceed on foot, using the terrain for concealment until they reached a position where Jessica could deploy the Barrett effectively. The Black Hawk descended rapidly, hovering just long enough for Jessica and Wilson to exit before banking away and disappearing into the distant mountains. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the whisper of wind through the rocky terrain. "We move fast, maintain communication discipline, and reach our primary firing position within 30 minutes. Jessica instructed, shouldering her pack and securing the Barrett across her back. "Our first priority is establishing communication with the surviving operators and coordinating their movement to the extraction point." They advanced through the rugged landscape with the fluid efficiency of experienced operators, using natural terrain features for concealment while maintaining awareness of potential enemy positions. Jessica's mind was focused entirely on the immediate mission, calculating distances and timing with the precision that had made her an exceptional sniper. The first indication of enemy presence came approximately 800 meters from their insertion point, a small observation post positioned on a rocky outcropping that overlooked the valley below. 2 Taliban fighters manned the position, their attention directed toward the distant sound of sporadic gunfire. Jessica signaled Wilson to hold position while she assessed the threat. The observation post presented a tactical problem. Eliminating the fighters would open their path forward, but might alert other enemy forces to their presence. Bypassing them risked leaving hostiles at their backs, potentially compromising their extraction route. Decision made. Jessica unslung her sidearm with its suppressor attachment. Close quarters elimination would maintain their stealth advantage while removing the immediate threat. She communicated her intent to Wilson through hand signals, then began working her way toward the observation post from the blind side. The elimination was swift and silent. Both fighters were down before they registered her presence, their bodies carefully concealed to delay discovery. Jessica rejoined Wilson, and they continued their advance toward the primary firing position. They reached the designated coordinates 17 minutes later, setting up on a rocky promontory that offered clear lines of sight to both the ambush site and the potential extraction point. Jessica deployed the Barrett on its bipod, adjusting the scope to account for distance and environmental factors, while Wilson established secure communications with the trapped operators. Ripcord, this is Overlord. Authentication code Sierra Tango 9-7. Respond. Wilson transmitted on the emergency frequency. The response came immediately, the operator's voice tight with tension but controlled. Overlord, this is Ripcord. Authentication Echo Foxtrot 3-1. Situation critical. We have 4 operators mobile, 3 wounded, 5 KIA. Heavy enemy presence on 3 sides. Estimate 50-plus fighters with crew-served weapons and possible RPGs. Jessica absorbed this information while studying the terrain through her scope. The surviving operators had taken cover in a shallow ravine that provided minimal protection from the elevated enemy positions surrounding them. Their situation was even more desperate than the initial reports had suggested. Ripcord, we're in position approximately 200 meters from your location with sniper support. Wilson replied. Spectre is inbound, ETA 12 minutes. We need you to prepare for movement to secondary extraction point at grid coordinates Whiskey Tango 5907. There was a brief pause before the operator responded. Overlord, be advised we have wounded personnel who cannot move under their own power. Current enemy fire makes any movement suicide without suppression. That's why we're here, Jessica said, her voice calm as she identified the first enemy position through her scope. A heavy machine gun emplacement on a ridge approximately 900 meters from the trapped operators. On my mark, Ripcord, I will begin engaging enemy positions from west to east. When their attention shifts to locating my position, you move. Wilson will guide you step by step to the extraction point. The Barrett was an extension of her body as Jessica settled into the familiar rhythm of controlled breathing and precise aim. The machine gun position contained 3 fighters, with a 4th serving as spotter. All were focused on the ravine, where the American operators were pinned down, believing they had their prey trapped with no hope of escape. Jessica squeezed the trigger with deliberate pressure. The Barrett roared, sending its massive XR, 50 caliber round downrange with devastating effect. The first fighter crumpled instantly, his position at the machine gun suddenly vacant. Before his companions could react, Jessica had already adjusted her aim and fired a second shot, eliminating the spotter with clinical precision. The remaining fighters scrambled for cover, their attention immediately diverted from the trapped operators to locating the source of the deadly accurate fire. Jessica maintained her disciplined fire, systematically eliminating key enemy positions while creating the perception of a larger attacking force. Ripcord, move now, Wilson instructed. Head northeast along the ravine for approximately 200 meters, then cut east toward the ridgeline. We'll provide continuous coverage. Through her scope, Jessica could see the operators beginning their movement, 2 carrying wounded comrades while the others provided local security. Their progress was slow but steady, using the distraction created by her precision fire to advance toward the extraction point. As they moved, Jessica continued engaging enemy positions, prioritizing crew-served weapons and command elements. Each shot was calculated for maximum psychological impact, creating confusion and hesitation among the Taliban fighters who couldn't determine the size or location of the force attacking them. Wilson maintained constant communication with the moving operators, guiding them through the safest route while Jessica provided lethal overwatch. The Barrett's distinctive report echoed through the mountains, a sound the Taliban fighters had learned to fear during their previous encounter with Jessica on the mountainside. The operators had covered approximately half the distance to the extraction point when enemy forces began to recover from their initial confusion. Several fighters identified the general direction of Jessica's position and began directing suppressive fire toward her location. Shift position, Wilson advised, as rounds began impacting the rocks around them. They've got our range. Jessica fired 3 final shots from her current location, then quickly relocated to a secondary position they had identified during their initial setup. The fluid movement between firing points was a tactic she had perfected during her previous ordeal, creating the impression of multiple snipers rather than a single operator. From her new position, Jessica resumed her systematic elimination of enemy fighters, focusing on those attempting to pursue the retreating operators. Each shot was deliberate and devastating, the Barrett's massive rounds tearing through cover that would have stopped conventional rifle fire. Ripcord is 200 meters from the extraction point, Wilson reported. Spectre is 3 minutes out. We're going to make it. Jessica acknowledged the update while maintaining her focus on the battlefield. The Taliban fighters were adapting to their tactics, becoming more cautious in their movements and attempting to coordinate a response to the perceived attack on their flank. She needed to maintain pressure, preventing them from organizing an effective pursuit of the retreating operators. The distinctive sound of Spectre's engines reached them moments later. the AC-130 gunship arriving on station with its array of devastating weapon systems. Jessica switched to an encrypted frequency to coordinate with the aircraft's fire control officer. Spectre 03, this is Overlord Actual. I have enemy concentrations at the following coordinates. Request immediate fire mission to cover final extraction. She provided precise locations of the largest enemy groupings, prioritizing those closest to the operator's movement route. Overlord Actual, this is Spectre 03. Coordinates received. Beginning fire mission now. B-Trace, advised, we have visual on friendly forces moving toward extraction point. The gunship's initial salvo struck with thunderous impact, 105mm rounds creating devastating explosions among the enemy positions Jessica had identified. The psychological effect was immediate and profound. The Taliban fighters, already disoriented by Jessica's precision sniping, now faced the overwhelming firepower of the AC-130. Ripcord has reached the extraction point, Wilson reported. Medevac is inbound, ETA 4 minutes. Jessica continued providing overwatch as the gunship systematically destroyed enemy positions throughout the area. Through her scope, she could see the surviving operators establishing a defensive perimeter around the wounded, preparing for the arrival of the extraction helicopter. When the Medevac Black Hawk appeared on the horizon, Jessica shifted her focus to providing direct cover for the landing zone. Her Barrett eliminated 3 fighters attempting to approach the extraction point, ensuring the helicopter could land safely, despite the ongoing combat in the surrounding area. Ripcord is aboard, Wilson confirmed minutes later. Extraction complete. All surviving operators accounted for. Jessica felt a surge of satisfaction as the Black Hawk lifted off, carrying the wounded operators to safety. The mission wasn't over. They still needed to exfiltrate themselves, but the primary objective had been accomplished. Lives that would have been lost without their intervention would now have a chance to survive. Spectre 03, this is Overlord Actual. Request continued fire support while we withdraw to secondary extraction point. Jessica transmitted, already preparing to move from their current position. The gunship acknowledged, shifting its fire pattern to create a corridor for Jessica and Wilson to withdraw safely. They moved with the same disciplined efficiency that had characterized their insertion, maintaining awareness of enemy movements while using the terrain and the gunship's suppressive fire to mask their retreat. Their secondary extraction point was a small clearing approximately 1 kilometer from their current position, close enough to reach quickly, far enough to avoid immediate pursuit. As they moved, Jessica reflected on the operation they had just completed. Against overwhelming odds, they had successfully extracted 7 operators who would otherwise have died in that ravine. The success validated her approach to impossible situations, methodical planning, precise execution, and the willingness to take calculated risks when necessary. But it still didn't address the larger problem. The traitor within their command structure, who had compromised the original mission and countless others before it. Their extraction helicopter arrived precisely on schedule, touching down just long enough for them to board before climbing rapidly away from the contested area. As they flew back toward the base, Jessica's thoughts turned from the immediate tactical situation to the intelligence problem waiting for them. We need to meet with Park immediately, she told Wilson over the helicopter's intercom. If she's identified anything in the communications logs, we need to move quickly before the mole realizes we're closing in. Wilson nodded, his expression reflecting the same determination that had carried them through the rescue operation. You think they'll try to run? Not yet. They don't know we've narrowed the field to 7 suspects. But they'll be watching for any sign that we're onto them. Our window to act is closing fast. Park was waiting for them when they returned to the secure facility, her normally reserved demeanor replaced by barely contained excitement. I found something, she announced without preamble. During the exact time window after this morning's briefing, there was an encrypted transmission sent from a terminal in the command center's private office area. Jessica felt her pulse quicken. Could you identify which terminal? Better than that, Park replied, displaying a complex network diagram on the main screen. I traced the transmission pathway. It bounced through multiple relays but eventually terminated at a server in Pakistan that's known to have Taliban connections. The sender? Wilson asked, though Jessica suspected they already knew the answer. Park hesitated, the implications of her discovery clearly troubling her. The transmission originated from Colonel Winter's personal terminal. Authentication logs confirm he was logged in at the time. Colonel Robert Winters, Deputy Commander for Operations, 24 years of distinguished service, and apparently a traitor responsible for the deaths of dozens of American personnel. The revelation was shocking, but fit the pattern they had been tracking. Winters had the access, the authority, and the operational knowledge to compromise missions systematically. "We need to take this to Hammond immediately," Jessica decided. "Winters has to be contained before he can do any more damage." They found Hammond in his office, reviewing after-action reports from the extraction operation. His expression reflected genuine relief at their success, but shifted to grim focus as they presented Park's findings. "Winters," he said, the single word heavy with betrayal. "I've known him for 15 years. Served with him in 3 different theaters. Never once suspected." "The evidence is conclusive, sir," Park insisted. "The transmission pattern matches exactly with previous security breaches, and the timing corresponds precisely with the ambushes." Hammond studied the technical data, his military mind processing the implications. "We need to move carefully. Winters has allies throughout the command structure. If he suspects we're on to him, he could disappear or destroy evidence before we can build a case." Jessica had been considering this problem since their return. "We need to catch him in the act. Set up another operation, one with limited distribution and controlled information. Feed him details that seem legitimate but would allow us to track exactly what information he passes and to whom." "A trap," Hammond nodded, seeing the strategy. "But it has to be convincing. Winters is too experienced to fall for obvious bait." They spent the next hour developing the plan, a fictional high-value target extraction in a region where recent intelligence suggested terrorist activity. The operational details would be shared only with the 7 suspects, each receiving slightly different information about timing, approach routes, and force composition. When the inevitable ambush was prepared, they would know exactly which version of the plans had been leaked. "We'll need to monitor all communication channels," Jessica emphasized. "The moment we confirm Winters is transmitting operational details, we move to contain him." Hammond approved the plan, though his expression reflected the personal cost of discovering betrayal by someone he had trusted implicitly. "I'll coordinate with counterintelligence. We'll have a team standing by to take him into custody once we have definitive evidence." As Jessica left Hammond's office, her tactical mind was already planning the next phase of their operation. The trap for Winters needed to be flawless, convincing enough to prompt him to act, controlled enough to prevent any actual casualties when the inevitable betrayal occurred. Back at their secure facility, she worked with Wilson and Park to develop the fictional operation in meticulous detail. Every aspect had to withstand scrutiny by an experienced officer like Winters, with enough legitimate elements to make the false intelligence compelling. "We're creating an entire fictional mission," Wilson observed as they finalized the operational plans. "Detailed enough to convince a senior officer with decades of experience." Jessica nodded, understanding the complexity of what they were attempting. "The best deceptions contain elements of truth. We'll use actual intelligence about regional activity, legitimate operational protocols, and realistic force compositions. The only fabricated elements will be the specific details we're using to identify the leak." Park was developing the technical aspects of their trap, subtle modifications to the base's communication monitoring systems that would allow them to track any transmission of the operational details in real time. "If Winters attempts to transmit any portion of this information, we'll know immediately. We can track not just that he sent it, but exactly what details were included." As they finalized their preparations, Jessica reflected on the path that had led her to this moment. What had begun as a desperate fight for survival on a mountainside had evolved into a complex counterintelligence operation, with implications that reached to the highest levels of military command. Her specialized skills, patience, precision, attention to detail, had proven as valuable in hunting a traitor as they had been in confronting enemy fighters. The fictional operation was briefed the following morning, a seemingly routine planning session for a mission scheduled to execute in 72 hours. Each of the 7 suspects received their unique version of the operational details, delivered with the same level of security and urgency as any legitimate mission. Jessica observed Winters during the briefing, searching for any indication that he suspected their trap. The colonel's demeanor revealed nothing unusual. He participated with the same professional focus he brought to all operational planning, asking appropriate questions and offering relevant suggestions based on his extensive experience. "Now we wait," Jessica told her team as they returned to their secure facility. "If Winters follows his established pattern, he'll transmit the compromised details within the next 6 hours." Park had established continuous monitoring of all communication channels from the command center, with particular focus on Winters' personal terminal and devices. The waiting was perhaps the most difficult part of their operation, maintaining vigilance while giving Winters enough space to believe his activities remained undetected. 4 hours and 17 minutes after the briefing concluded, Park's monitoring system triggered an alert. "We've got transmission activity from Winters' terminal," she reported, fingers flying across her keyboard as she captured the data stream in real time. Encrypted communication using the same protocol we identified previously. Wilson and Jessica watched as Park decoded the transmission, revealing the operational details Winters was passing to his Taliban contacts. The information matched exactly the unique version they had provided to him during the briefing, irrefutable evidence of his treachery. Transmitting coordinates for rally points and primary extraction route, Park narrated as the data appeared on her screen. Force composition, air support details, everything they would need to prepare an effective ambush. Jessica was already on the secure line to Hammond, providing confirmation that their trap had succeeded. "We have definitive evidence, sir. Winters is actively transmitting the operational details we provided this morning. The unique markers confirm it's him without any possibility of error." Hammond's response was immediate and resolute. "Counterintelligence team is moving now. Maintain your position and continue monitoring all communications. If Winters attempts to warn his contacts or destroy evidence, we need to know immediately." The next 30 minutes passed in tense silence as they tracked the counterintelligence team's progress through the base. Winters was in his office, apparently unaware that his treachery had finally been exposed. When the team reached his location, Park's monitoring system captured his final desperate attempt to warn his contacts, a brief encrypted message that the counterintelligence operators interrupted mid-transmission. "They've got him," Park confirmed, watching as Winters' connection to the base network was terminated. All communications severed. The operation had succeeded completely. Winters was in custody. The intelligence network he had compromised was exposed, and the evidence they had gathered would ensure he faced the full consequences of his betrayal. More importantly, they had ended a security breach that had cost dozens of American lives and threatened countless more. As Jessica processed their success, she felt neither triumph nor satisfaction, only a grim recognition that they had fulfilled their duty. The betrayal by a senior officer like Winters would have far-reaching implications throughout the military command structure, prompting investigations and security reviews that would continue for months or years. Hammond contacted them an hour later, his voice carrying the weight of what they had discovered. "Winters is secure. Initial interrogation confirms our worst fears. He's been compromising operations for at least 18 months. Counterintelligence is already working to identify his full network and assess the damage." "What was his motivation?" Jessica asked, the question that had troubled her throughout their investigation. Why would someone with his record betray everything he supposedly stood for? Hammond's response was delayed, suggesting he was struggling with the same question. Financial, initially. He had gambling debts that made him vulnerable to recruitment. But over time, it appears he developed ideological justifications. Convinced himself that American policy in the region was fundamentally flawed and that he was somehow serving a greater good by, balancing the scales. The explanation offered little satisfaction. No rationalization could justify the deliberate sacrifice of American lives, regardless of one's political views or personal circumstances. Winters had betrayed not just his country but the fundamental trust placed in him by the men and women under his command. "What happens now, sir?" Wilson asked, voicing the question on all their minds. "For Winters, a military tribunal and almost certain life imprisonment. For us, there's still work to do. We need to review every operation he influenced, identify any remaining security vulnerabilities, and ensure this kind of penetration can't happen again." Jessica nodded, already considering the scope of the task ahead. The identification and capture of Winters represented not the end of their mission, but the beginning of a more complex phase, rebuilding security systems and trust that had been systematically undermined from within. As Hammond ended the call, Jessica turned to her team, Wilson with his unwavering reliability, Park with her technical brilliance, and felt profound gratitude for their partnership throughout this operation. Together, they had accomplished something that larger and better-equipped intelligence teams had failed to achieve. They had identified and neutralized a threat that had seemed almost impossible to detect. "I wouldn't have believed it a week ago," Wilson admitted, "that we'd go from fighting for survival on that mountainside to exposing a senior officer as a traitor." Jessica's thoughts returned to the Barrett and those desperate hours when she had faced overwhelming odds with nothing but her rifle and her training. The same principles that had kept her alive then, patience, precision, adaptability, had proven equally valuable in this very different battlefield. "Different weapons," she replied. "Same fight. Protecting our people, whatever it takes." As they began the process of documenting their investigation for the official record, Jessica reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point. The Barrett on that mountainside had been more than just a weapon. It had been a symbol of what one person with the right skills and unwavering determination could accomplish against seemingly impossible odds. Now, as they worked to secure the evidence against Winters and dismantle his network of betrayal, she carried that same lesson forward, that in the face of overwhelming challenges, the difference between victory and defeat often came down to individual courage and the refusal to accept failure as inevitable. The path ahead would not be easy. Rebuilding security systems compromised by a senior officer would require months of painstaking work. Restoring trust among a command structure shaken by internal betrayal would be even more challenging. But Jessica faced these tasks with the same steady resolve that had guided her actions on the mountainside, one precise shot at a time, until the mission was complete. 6 months after Winters' arrest, Jessica stood at the edge of a firing range in Fort Benning, watching a new class of sniper trainees work through their qualification course. The Georgia sun beat down mercilessly, but the shooters maintained their focus, applying the fundamentals of marksmanship with varying degrees of success. Jessica could identify each trainee's strengths and weaknesses at a glance: the slight flinch before trigger pull, the inconsistent breathing pattern, the subtle tension in shoulders that should remain relaxed. "What do you think?" Colonel Hammond asked, joining her at the observation point. He'd flown in specifically for this meeting, his presence at the sniper school drawing curious glances from instructors who wondered why the commander of a high-profile counterintelligence task force was observing basic qualification exercises. Jessica studied the line of shooters before answering. "Good fundamentals, but they're still thinking about the process instead of letting it become instinct. They're shooters, not snipers yet." Hammond nodded, understanding the distinction. "How's the shoulder?" Jessica rotated her right arm automatically, testing the range of motion in the joint that had been reconstructed after their final operation in Afghanistan. 85%. "Doctors say I'll get back another 5 with continued therapy." The injury had occurred during the chaotic aftermath of Winters' arrest. While Jessica and her team had successfully exposed the colonel's treachery, they had underestimated the extent of his network within the base. One of Winters' associates, a junior intelligence officer who had assisted in transmitting compromised information, had attempted to destroy evidence by setting explosive charges in the command center's secure communications hub. Jessica had discovered the plot moments before detonation, managing to evacuate essential personnel but suffering significant injuries when she returned to retrieve critical intelligence files. The explosion had torn through the facility, leaving her trapped beneath collapsed concrete and steel with a dislocated shoulder and multiple fractures. The physical recovery had been grueling, but the professional impact of the Winters investigation had been even more profound. The discovery of a senior officer's treachery had triggered a comprehensive security review throughout the regional command structure, leading to additional arrests and a complete overhaul of operational planning protocols. Jessica, Wilson, and Park had received commendations for their role in exposing the conspiracy, but the true reward had been in the lives saved by preventing further compromised operations. Intelligence analysts estimated that Winters' network had been responsible for at least 47 American casualties before their exposure, a number that would have continued to grow without their intervention. "You didn't come all this way to check on my physical therapy progress," Jessica observed, returning her attention to Hammond. "What's happening?" Hammond's expression shifted, revealing the real purpose of his visit. "We've identified another security breach, different from Winters. Network, but potentially more dangerous. This one's at the strategic level. Someone with access to long-term operational planning across multiple theaters." Jessica felt a familiar tension building at the base of her skull. the instinctive response to an emerging threat that had served her well throughout her career. Where? Pentagon, Strategic Planning Group for Special Operations Command. They're developing next-generation deployment protocols for high-risk environments, and intelligence suggests the entire framework is being compromised as it's developed. The implications were staggering. Where Winters had compromised individual tactical operations, this new breach could undermine the fundamental strategic approach for special operations globally. The potential casualties would be measured not in dozens but in hundreds or thousands over time. "Why are you telling me this?" Jessica asked, though she already suspected the answer. Hammond met her gaze directly. "Because I need someone who can think differently about intelligence problems. Someone who's proven they can identify threats that conventional approaches miss. I'm assembling a specialized task force at the Pentagon, and I want you to lead the operational team." Jessica glanced back at the firing range, where the trainees continued their methodical practice. Her assignment at Fort Benning had been meant as recovery duty, sharing her expertise while her body healed from the injuries sustained in Afghanistan. She had expected to return to field operations eventually, but not this soon, and certainly not for an assignment with this level of strategic importance. "What about Wilson and Park?" she asked, already being processed for transfer. "Park's technical skills will be essential for this operation, and Wilson's proved himself invaluable as your operational partner. The three of you work together with an efficiency that can't be manufactured or trained. I need that synergy for what we're facing." Jessica considered the offer, weighing her still healing body against the urgency in Hammond's voice. The stakes were clearly enormous, and Hammond wouldn't have come personally unless the situation was critical. "When do we start?" she asked, decision made. "Immediately. Transport's waiting at the airfield. We'll brief you fully once we're secure at the Pentagon facility." As they walked toward the waiting vehicle, Jessica found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her to this moment. From that desperate stand on an Afghan mountainside to hunting traitors within her own command structure, each challenge had prepared her for increasingly complex missions. Her specialized skills, patience, precision, tactical awareness, had proven valuable in contexts far beyond conventional combat operations. The flight to Washington was spent reviewing preliminary intelligence on the new security breach. The situation was even more concerning than Hammond had initially suggested. The Strategic Planning Group was developing deployment protocols that would guide special operations for the next decade, establishing fundamental approaches for how America's most elite military units would operate in high-threat environments worldwide. Evidence suggested that these protocols were being compromised in real time, with detailed planning documents appearing in encrypted communications between hostile intelligence services. The breach had been detected only by chance, when a routine counterintelligence operation intercepted fragments of a strategic assessment that hadn't yet been officially released outside the planning group. The traditional approach would be to investigate everyone with access to Strategic Planning Group, identifying key personnel and their access patterns. "What's being done to contain the breach while we investigate?" "These documents," Hammond explained as they reviewed the intelligence. "But that's over 30 personnel, all with impeccable records and the highest security clearances. We need to narrow the field quickly, before the entire strategic framework is compromised." Jessica studied the organizational chart of the Strategic Planning Group, identifying key personnel and their access patterns. "What's being done to contain the breach while we investigate?" "We've implemented a controlled information strategy, distributing slightly different versions of the planning documents to different team members, similar to what we did with Winters. But these are sophisticated planners who might detect that kind of manipulation if it's too obvious." The challenge was substantially different from the Winters investigation. Where that had focused on a relatively small command structure in a tactical environment, this operation would require them to operate within the Pentagon itself, navigating the complex politics and security systems of America's military headquarters, while hunting for a traitor among some of the most trusted officers in the country. They arrived at the Pentagon shortly after midnight, entering through a secured access point that bypassed the main security checkpoints. Hammond led them to a specialized facility 3 levels below the main complex, a self-contained operations center designated for counterintelligence activities that required complete separation from regular Pentagon functions. Wilson and Park were already there, having arrived earlier in the day to establish their systems and review the intelligence materials. Their greeting was warm but brief, professional focus immediately taking precedence over personal reunion. "We've been mapping the information flow patterns," Park explained, displaying complex network diagrams on the main screen. Based on when specific documents were compromised, we've narrowed the potential sources to 17 individuals who had access during the relevant timeframes. Wilson had been analyzing personnel backgrounds and potential vulnerabilities. No obvious red flags in their histories. These are career officers and senior civilian advisors, most with 15+ years of service. No financial problems, no suspicious contacts, nothing that would typically make them targets for recruitment. Jessica absorbed this information while studying the photographs and service records of their suspects. Unlike Winters, whose betrayal had ultimately stemmed from personal weaknesses exploited by enemy intelligence, this situation suggested something more complex, possibly ideological motivation or a deeply embedded sleeper agent placed years ago for exactly this kind of access. We need to understand the what before we can identify the who, she decided. Exactly what information is being compromised, in what form, and through what channels. The specific content and transmission methods might tell us more about the source than their official backgrounds. Hammond nodded approvingly. That's why I wanted you leading this, Reeves. Conventional counterintelligence would start with the suspects and work outward. You're looking at the problem from a different angle. Jessica outlined her initial approach. They would analyze the compromised documents in granular detail, identifying exactly which sections and strategic concepts were being transmitted to hostile intelligence services. This pattern might reveal whether the breach was coming from someone focused on specific operational areas or with access to the entire strategic framework. Simultaneously, they would establish comprehensive surveillance of all electronic communications from the strategic planning group, looking for patterns or anomalies that might indicate covert transmission methods. Park's technical expertise would be crucial for this aspect of the investigation, requiring her to develop monitoring systems that could operate undetected within the Pentagon's highly secure networks. We'll need to move carefully, Jessica cautioned. If our target realizes they're under investigation, they could accelerate their timeline or destroy evidence. Every step needs to be completely deniable and invisible to regular Pentagon security protocols. Hammond provided the authorization they needed to implement their plan, along with direct access to the classified surveillance systems that would allow them to monitor their suspects without triggering standard security alerts. The operation would proceed under his personal authority, bypassing the regular counterintelligence chain of command to maintain absolute operational security. As Hammond departed to manage the political aspects of their investigation, Jessica turned to her team with renewed focus. Park, I need comprehensive monitoring of all electronic communications from our 17 suspects. Focus particularly on any unusual patterns or deviations from established routines. Wilson, start building detailed profiles of each suspect, not just their official records, but their actual behaviors and interactions within the planning group. Who they talk to, which documents they access most frequently, any patterns that might indicate special interest in specific strategic areas. With her team moving into action, Jessica began her own analysis of the compromised documents, searching for patterns that might reveal the source's identity or motivation. The strategic framework being developed was comprehensive, covering everything from initial intelligence gathering to extraction protocols for compromised operations. The breach could have originated from any number of specialized areas within that framework. The investigation proceeded methodically over the next 3 days, with the team working around the clock to establish their surveillance network and analyze the mountain of data flowing from the strategic planning group. Jessica maintained a disciplined approach, resisting the temptation to jump to conclusions or focus too quickly on specific suspects. Their first significant lead emerged from Park's communication analysis. I've identified an unusual pattern in the electronic access logs, she reported, displaying her findings on the main screen. 3 of our suspects consistently access the planning database during off hours, between 0200 and 0400. That's outside normal working patterns for the planning group. Jessica studied the data with interest. Are they accessing the same documents or different sections? Different sections, but there's a pattern to the sequence. They move systematically through the framework, focusing particularly on deployment protocols and contingency planning for compromised operations. This was valuable intelligence, narrowing their focus to 3 primary suspects: Colonel James Matheson, Dr. Elizabeth Chen, and Commander Samuel Wright. All had distinguished careers and specialized expertise that made them essential to the strategic planning group. Any of them would have the knowledge and access to compromise the entire framework if properly motivated. Wilson's behavioral analysis added another dimension to their investigation. Matheson and Wright interact regularly. They've known each other for years and frequently collaborate on planning sessions. Chen operates more independently, focusing primarily on technological integration aspects of the framework. Jessica considered this information within the context of the compromise documents. The materials that had appeared in enemy communications showed a sophisticated understanding of both the tactical and technological aspects of the framework, suggesting either collaboration between multiple sources or a single source, with comprehensive knowledge across different specialties. We need to know if they're working together or if one of them is our primary target, she decided. Park, can you isolate their individual access patterns and compare them to the timing of known compromised transmissions? Park's analysis revealed something unexpected. There's no direct correlation between database access and transmitted compromises. The information appears in enemy communications approximately 72 hours after it's accessed in the database, suggesting an intermediate step or storage location before transmission. This complexity reinforced Jessica's assessment that they were dealing with a sophisticated operation rather than opportunistic betrayal. Their target was implementing operational security measures that would make direct detection extremely difficult through conventional monitoring. We need to change our approach, Jessica concluded. Direct surveillance isn't giving us enough to identify our target conclusively. We need to implement a controlled information strategy. Something subtle enough that sophisticated planners won't detect it, but distinctive enough that we can identify the source if it appears in compromised communications. Working with Hammond, they developed a specialized version of the strategic framework, one that included carefully crafted fingerprinted information unique to each of their 3 primary suspects. These weren't obvious alterations that would be easily detected, but subtle modifications to technical specifications and procedural details that would be distinctive if transmitted to hostile intelligence services. Now we wait, Jessica told her team after implementing the modified documents. Our target will continue their normal patterns, accessing and transmitting the information according to their established routine. When the fingerprinted data appears in enemy communications, we'll know exactly which version was compromised. The waiting period was perhaps the most challenging aspect of their operation. Jessica maintained constant vigilance, reviewing surveillance data and refining their response plans while their trap developed. The specialized skills that had served her on the Afghan mountainside, patience, attention to detail, the ability to maintain focus during extended periods of apparent inactivity, proved equally valuable in this very different battlefield. 4 days after implementing their fingerprinted documents, Park detected the first signs of their trap bearing fruit. "We've got intercept activity," she reported, displaying the encrypted communications their monitoring systems had captured. Chinese military intelligence discussing contingency protocols for compromised operations in the South China Sea. Jessica and Wilson gathered around Park's workstation as she decoded the intercepted transmission, revealing details from their modified strategic framework. The specific technical specifications mentioned in the communication matched exactly the fingerprinted version provided to Dr. Elizabeth Chen. "It's Chen," Jessica confirmed, studying the decoded text with careful attention. "The details about electronic countermeasures are exactly the modifications we made to her version of the framework." Wilson looked troubled by the confirmation. Chen's background is impeccable. 22 years with naval intelligence before joining the Pentagon as a civilian advisor, numerous commendations for contributions to national security, no obvious motivation for betrayal. Jessica had been reviewing Chen's personnel file with increasing attention since they'd narrowed their suspects. Her specialization is particularly valuable. Integration of advanced electronic warfare systems into operational planning. That expertise gives her unique insights into vulnerabilities that would be especially valuable to foreign intelligence. With their target identified, they needed to determine the exact method Chen was using to transmit the compromised information. Park's analysis suggested the use of a sophisticated dead drop system rather than direct communication with hostile intelligence, explaining the 72-hour delay between database access and the appearance of compromised information in enemy communications. Hammond authorized heightened surveillance of Chen's activities, including physical tracking outside the Pentagon facility. Jessica coordinated this operation personally, applying the same methodical approach she'd used for tactical operations in combat environments. They needed to catch Chen in the act of transferring information, establishing irrefutable evidence of her treachery. The breakthrough came during Chen's weekly visit to the National Archives, ostensibly for research related to historical operational precedents. Jessica observed from a discreet distance as Chen accessed reference materials in the main reading room, her behavior seemingly appropriate for legitimate research activities. What captured Jessica's attention wasn't Chen's actions, but her equipment, specifically, a specialized tablet device she used for taking notes. The device was authorized for use with classified materials, featuring encryption and security protocols that allowed Pentagon personnel to work with sensitive information outside secure facilities. "Park, I need everything you can find about Chen's tablet," Jessica requested via secure communication. "Manufacturer, security protocols, usage patterns, everything." Park's response came within hours, revealing critical information about the device's specifications. It's ASCIF-approved secure tablet, but Chen requested a specialized configuration with enhanced memory capacity and additional processing power for her analytical work. The modifications were approved through normal channels but required custom firmware to maintain security compliance. Jessica immediately recognized the potential vulnerability. Who performed the firmware modifications? External contractor, TechSecure. Solutions. They're cleared for classified work, but the specific technician who handled Chen's device was a new hire named David Zhang. Wilson had been investigating Chen's personal history and connections, and the name triggered an immediate response. Zhang is Chen's cousin on her mother's side. Different family name because of marriage patterns, but they grew up together in California before Zhang's family returned to China when he was a teenager. He came back to the U.S. for college about 8 years ago. The connection was exactly what they needed: a plausible pathway for recruitment and a technical mechanism for transmitting classified information. If Zhang had modified Chen's tablet with specialized firmware, he could have created a covert channel allowing the device to extract and store classified data accessed through legitimate Pentagon systems. The tablet is the dead drop, Jessica concluded. Chen accesses the information legitimately through Pentagon systems, and the modified firmware automatically extracts and encrypts specific data patterns. When she visits locations with particular wireless networks, like the National Archives, the tablet transmits the stored data through a covert channel disguised as normal network traffic. With this understanding of Chen's methodology, they could finally move to contain the breach and gather definitive evidence. Hammond authorized a specialized technical team to develop a monitoring system that could detect and record the covert transmissions from Chen's tablet without alerting her to their surveillance. The operation culminated during Chen's next visit to the National Archives. As she worked in the reading room, the specialized monitoring equipment confirmed what Jessica had suspected. The tablet was transmitting encrypted data packages through a sophisticated covert channel, using the archive's public wireless network as cover for communication with foreign intelligence servers. "We've got it," Park confirmed, monitoring the transmission patterns from their mobile command post near the archives. The tablet is actively transmitting data consistent with the fingerprinted documents we provided to Chen. The encryption methodology matches known Chinese intelligence protocols. With irrefutable evidence of espionage in progress, Hammond authorized Chen's immediate arrest. Jessica coordinated with FBI counterintelligence agents who had been positioned throughout the archives, ensuring the operation proceeded without alerting potential associates or creating a public scene that might compromise ongoing investigations. Chen's expression when approached by the agents revealed momentary shock before settling into resigned acceptance. The look of someone who had always known this day might come but had hoped to avoid it through careful operational security. She offered no resistance, maintaining complete silence as she was escorted from the building to a waiting secure transport vehicle. The technical analysis of Chen's tablet confirmed their assessment of her methodology. The modified firmware had created a sophisticated system for extracting, encrypting, and transmitting classified information without triggering standard security protocols. More concerning was the discovery that similar modifications had been implemented in at least 7 other devices used by Pentagon personnel, suggesting a much broader intelligence operation than they had initially suspected. "This is just the beginning," Hammond told Jessica during their debriefing session following Chen's arrest. Her network likely extends throughout multiple defense and intelligence agencies. We need to identify every compromised device and every individual involved in this operation. The scope of the task was daunting, but Jessica approached it with the same methodical determination that had characterized her previous operations. The skills that had allowed her to hold off 89 Taliban fighters with a single Barrett rifle, patience, precision, systematic problem-solving, would guide her through this new battlefield of counterintelligence operations at the highest levels of national security. 3 months later, Jessica stood in the Pentagon briefing room, presenting the results of their expanded investigation to the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Their operation had identified 17 compromised individuals across multiple defense and intelligence agencies, all using modified devices that created covert channels for transmitting classified information to hostile intelligence services. The technical sophistication of this operation suggests long-term planning and significant resource investment, Jessica explained, displaying the network diagram they had developed through painstaking analysis. This wasn't opportunistic recruitment of individual assets, but a systematic penetration operation targeting specific technical vulnerabilities in our secure communication systems. The implications were profound, requiring comprehensive reevaluation of security protocols for classified information systems throughout the defense establishment. Jessica's team had developed specific recommendations for addressing the vulnerabilities exploited by Chen's network, focusing particularly on third-party contractors involved in modifying secured devices. As the briefing concluded, General Marshall, chairman of the Joint Chiefs, approached Jessica directly. "Captain Reeves, your work on this operation has been exemplary. The methodical approach you applied to identifying and neutralizing this threat represents the highest standards of counterintelligence practice." Jessica acknowledged the compliment with professional courtesy, but her focus remained on the work still to be done. The identification and neutralization of Chen's network represented significant progress, but the broader challenge of securing America's classified information systems against sophisticated penetration operations would require ongoing vigilance and innovation. Later that evening, as Jessica reviewed intelligence reports in their secure facility, Wilson approached with a small package. "This arrived for you today. Came through special channels with Hammond's authorization." The package contained a framed photograph and a brief handwritten note. The photo showed Martinez, Thompson, Ramirez, Davis, and Lewis, the 5 wounded operators she had helped rescue during that desperate operation in Afghanistan. They were standing together at a rehabilitation facility, all recovered and clearly back on active duty. The note was simple but profound. "You saved more than just our lives that day. You showed us what one person with the right skills and unwavering determination can accomplish against impossible odds. That lesson continues to guide us through every challenge we face. Thank you for being the difference when it mattered most." Jessica felt a complex surge of emotion as she studied the photograph. Those hours on the Afghan mountainside with her Barrett seemed distant now, almost belonging to another lifetime. Yet the core principles that had guided her through that ordeal, precision, patience, tactical awareness, the refusal to accept defeat as inevitable, continued to serve her in this new arena of counterintelligence operations. Her journey from combat sniper to counterintelligence specialist hadn't been planned or expected, but it represented a natural evolution of her unique capabilities. The Barrett .50 caliber rifle that had changed everything on that mountain remained a powerful symbol of what specialized skills could accomplish when applied with unwavering determination against seemingly insurmountable challenges. As she prepared for the next phase of their operation, a comprehensive security review of classified information systems throughout the defense establishment, Jessica reflected on the continuing impact of that pivotal experience. The lesson wasn't about weapons or tactics, but about the fundamental human capacity to overcome overwhelming odds through skill, determination, and the refusal to accept defeat. That lesson would continue to guide her through whatever challenges lay ahead, just as it had guided those operators she had rescued from that desperate situation in Afghanistan. One person with the right skills, unwavering determination, and absolute clarity of purpose could indeed change everything when it mattered most. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.